Forgo.
You bought a DSLR. Now you did this to improve your photography, to take it to the next level. But the only problem is, you're shooting in auto. Now that's fine and all, but in order to take advantage of this tool that you bought and paid a lot of money for, you need to learn how to start shooting in manual. Now I know, it can be kind of intimidating because there's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of settings, but the purpose of this video today is for you to get off your butt and start shooting in manual. I'm going to break it down in 4 easy steps. First, we're going to talk about exposure. Second, aperture. Third, shutter speed. And fourth, ISO. Let's begin. To begin with, exposure. If you look through your viewfinder, that's right here, put your eye through that. While the camera is on, and while obviously the lens cap is not on, you're going to point at your subject, you're going to press down as if you're going to take a picture, and you'll see a light meter appear. The sweet spot is to get it down in the center, in 0. This light meter is going to tell us that our subject, the person or the thing that we want to take a picture of, is properly exposed. Now, why is it important to have a picture properly exposed? Well, if there's too much light, it's going to be blown out. Your image is going to be all white. It's like staring into the sun. If it's underexposed, then your picture is going to be too dark. So a rule of thumb is to get it to that center, that sweet spot. If there's not enough light, you can underexpose a little bit. It doesn't matter. But if you could place it down in the center, you're going to have a really good image. Now, I know you can fix everything in post, but if you get it right the first time, you'll have a lot less work to do on Photoshop. Now we're going to talk about aperture. Aperture refers to the eye of the lens or the eye of the camera. Remember, light goes in through this lens and through this eye. It goes into the camera and it hits the sensor, and that is what determines if your picture is going to be properly exposed or not. Another thing to keep in mind when talking about aperture is that if you're fully open, you're going to get that bokeh effect, that shallow depth of field. What's shallow depth of field? Take your finger out and just stare at it. What's in focus? That's right, your finger. Everything else blurry. That's the way we humans naturally see the world. We focus on one thing and everything becomes blurry. So that's something, and more of an artistic thing to keep in mind when taking pictures. Most people, when you're taking portraits, the best thing to do is get a shallow depth of field. Now, if you're taking pictures of a group of people, then you're going to have to use a higher f-stop, like something like f32, where everything's going to be in focus. Or if you're taking pictures of a landscape where you need everything in focus, you're going to have like f32, something like that. If you want to get that shallow depth of field effect, you're going to have to use something like f1.4 or something a little bit higher, but f1.4 is probably like the lowest you can go. Now we're going to talk about shutter speed. To adjust the shutter speed, you're going to have to move this dial right here back and forth. This is a Nikon, so on a Canon it might be somewhere else, but it's basically the same thing, same controls. Shutter speed refers to how fast you want this eye to blink. If you have a lot of light, then you can have a higher shutter speed, like 1/1000th or 1/500th of a second. If there's not a lot of light in the room, you're going to have to use a slower shutter speed. You're going to have to take a longer exposure. You're going to have to make this shutter or this eye blink at a slower rate. That way more light, an opportunity with more light can come in and hit the sensor, and you can have a properly exposed image. Something to keep in mind is if you're taking pictures of sporting events or you're having people in motion, dancing, playing or something, you're going to have to use a high shutter speed so it can freeze them and you can have a properly exposed image, a properly image where you could see that action being taken place. Otherwise you're going to get a blurry image. Something to keep in mind. But if you're like me and you don't like using tripods and you're always on the go, you want a sweet spot for that shutter speed is 1/30th of a second. If you go any lower, you're gonna risk having a blurred image. So that's something to keep in mind if you're out and about. If you don't have a tripod, if you don't have access to a tripod, your shutter speed's gonna be 1/30th, and then you're gonna adjust your aperture and your ISO. That would be the other settings you adjust so you can get that proper exposure. Finally, we're gonna talk about ISO. ISO is referring to the sensitivity of the sensor that's in the camera. Remember, there's a sensor here. If you want a clear image, like if you want to get to that, like, if you see a magazine, if you see some type of review or some type of article, the pictures are always so clear. That's because the photographer is using a low ISO, probably 100 or something like that. Now, if there is not a lot of light in your environment, you're going to have to use a higher ISO. It could be 200, it could be 400, it can be all the way to 6400 and even higher. Now, the problem is with using a higher ISO is that you're going to get a grainier image. A low ISO means a clear image. A high ISO means you're going to get a more noisy, more grain, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with having some grain in your photos. Some people like that because it reminds them of film photography. But if you're going to be taking professional photos, if you're going to be taking event photos, people are going to want some clear images. So I recommend going 100, ISO 100. If you can go 200, 400, that's not bad. But once you start going higher up there, you're going to get more grain. So that's pretty much it, guys. You should be able to go out there and shoot manually now. And if you guys need any more information on photography, if you have any recommendations, if you have any more questions, feel free to comment below.